Hello from Jonathan and me. Welcome to the programme.
Yes, good evening. A former MP from the Anglia region could be facing criminal charges over her expenses claims.
The Daily Telegraph is reporting that Margaret Moran, who stood down from her post in Luton South in May, is being investigated by police and could become the fifth politician to face trial.
The latest development follows her repayment last year of more than £20,000 when the expenses scandal first broke. Neil Bradford has this report.
Almost every trace of Margaret Moran has vanished from this town. All that remains is her battered reputation. At her former office, which is now for rent, her name has been erased from above the door. At her former Luton home, there has been no sign of life for months. All personal possessions have now been moved out. But Luton may not have heard the last from its former MP. The Daily Telegraph claims she's the subject of a long police investigation. The newspaper reports she could be charged within weeks. Details of Margaret Moran's expenses first came under scrutiny in May last year, when the Telegraph revealed she'd claimed £22,500 for treating dry rot at a property in Southampton, nowhere near her constituency. She was silent for 3 weeks before announcing she was standing down as MP at the next election. Shortly afterwards, she went on long-term sick leave. But she was back in the headlines in March when she was secretly filmed applying for a job. She boasted how she could call on a girls' gang of former colleagues to help clients lobby government. Esther Ranson, a candidate in Luton South at the last election, who campaigned against Margaret Moran, says the matter needs sorting.
I'm delighted that this is being pursued. I think the public wish it to be pursued, and certainly I know voters in Luton want it pursued. It is very important for Parliament's sake that we know whether the actual sums of money she claimed had any relevance to any of her parliamentary work, and if not, they should throw the book at her.
Margaret Moran once had many friends in this town after 2 terms as an MP, but it's fair to say today you'd be hard-pushed to find anyone who would still consider themselves a supporter.
Support? You're kidding, aren't you? No, sorry.
Just like everybody else. I mean, if you're, no one's above the law, so it should be looked upon as being a crime that's going to be investigated and take it from there.
If we'd have done it, we'd have been up in court, wouldn't we? So, fair play. I agree.
There was no comment from police or Margaret Moran today, but it is clear the expenses scandal is far from over. Neil Bradford, Anglia News, Luton.
Well, our political correspondent Matthew Hudson is live for us in Westminster this evening. Matt, it's been a while since we've heard from Margaret Moran, isn't it?
That's right. You have to go all the way back to May 2009 to find the last time she spoke to the media about these allegations. On that occasion, she strenuously denied any wrongdoing, and obviously we've got no evidence to suggest that that position has changed. As Neil said in his report, shortly after the storm broke, she was signed off long-term sick with stress. She continued to draw her MP salary, and we understand that when she finally stood down, it was with a golden handshake of around £55,000.
And Matthew, we've already seen that these investigations can end in criminal charges.
That's right. If Miss Moran is eventually charged, then she won't find herself the first high-profile politician from our region to find themselves in the dock over this scandal. The trial of Lord Hanningfield, the former leader of Essex County Council, is due to start on December the 13th. He's alleged to have charged for hotel stays here in London, when in fact it was nights when he returned to his home in Essex. And of course 4 other Labour MPs, former Labour MPs from other parts of the country, have also been charged. What's intriguing about today's Telegraph story, though, is it says the police are investigating 2 or 3 other MPs. Now, one of them is thought to be former London Labour member Harry Cohen, but that still leaves 1 or 2 others. And given the sheer scale of the dubious claims uncovered by the Daily Telegraph, you might imagine there's 1 or 2 people around here looking over their shoulders tonight who had thought this whole business had gone away.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Matthew. A man who died at a go-karting track in Essex on Monday has been named. Derek McKechnie from Brentwood, who was 59, crashed into tyres at the edge of the track at IndyCart in Colchester. It's still not clear if he died from natural causes or his injuries. The incident is being investigated by Colchester Borough Council.
Right next tonight, it's 2 years since the German locum doctor Daniel Labani killed the Cambridgeshire pensioner David Gray with an overdose of diamorphine. An inquest found that part of the problem lay in his poor grasp of English.
Despite those findings, a new investigation has revealed that 3/4 of overseas doctors are working here without checks on their language ability or their clinical competence. Natalie Gray's been looking into the issue.
Dr. Daniel Ubani gave a patient 10 times the recommended dose of a painkiller after flying in for his first NHS shift. He could barely speak English. David Gray from Mayney in Cambridgeshire was 70.
His death caused a furore, but 2 years on, it seems lessons haven't been learnt. Figures obtained through a Freedom of Information request show that as many as 1,500 foreign doctors working in surgeries across Britain have never had their skills or fluency in English checked.
David Gray's son, himself a GP, is furious.
Despite the death of my father, they continue to allow the doctors in without properly vetting them. What more does it take to get the system changed?
NHS Cambridgeshire was the trust which employed Dr. Ubani, but it's admitted to Pulse newspaper that only a third of its 29 foreign doctors have been checked. However, in a reply it said, since 2004, all overseas doctors coming onto the performers list have had the required language tests. Foreign doctors who had been working in Cambridgeshire prior to that aren't required to be tested, but are still regularly monitored. It's not known how many foreign GPs fly in to cover out-of-hours shifts, but they're employed by up to a third of all trusts. Campaigners warn it can only be a matter of time before another patient dies because of a doctor's incompetence.
If you've got doctors who are incompetent, as Ubani was, and doctors who can't converse in the language of the country they're working in, it is just statistically a matter of time before somebody else does die, yes.
The coalition government has pledged to pass new laws, but there's no timetable yet. Natalie Gray, Anglia News.
Well, it is a real concern. Earlier, we spoke to Caroline Hacker, Director of Policy at the Patients Association, and we asked her for her reaction to that Pulse survey.
Well, we think this is another example of the postcode lottery that exists within the NHS. It's completely unacceptable that some trusts are not making sure that the doctors they employ have the basic language skills that they need to communicate with patients.
Even following David Gray's death, Cambridgeshire PCT admitted testing the language skills of less than a third of its non-EU doctors. Does that surprise you?
I think it is certainly very shocking. I think what's really quite alarming with the Dr. Ubani case was that he was actually refused to be employed as a locum in a trust in Yorkshire, and it's quite concerning that he was refused to practice in Yorkshire and yet he was able to practice in Cambridge. And I think what comes forward there is that there's a lack of communication between trusts and sort of policies that exist between sort of throughout trusts and between trusts that really need to be addressed.
One of the other things that perhaps could be addressed this evening, tell us what the policy is at the moment. If a patient goes in to see a doctor, what can they say to that doctor to reassure themselves currently?
If patients go into hospital and they're not confident with the doctor that is administering their care, then they certainly should raise that with the ward manager and, if necessary, take it further in the trust.
And very quickly, Caroline, are you concerned a similar tragedy could happen again?
Well, I think certainly, unless the situation is resolved and that there's adequate checks in place that are being carried out by all trusts, not just a handful, but they need to be carried out by all trusts, then there certainly is the likelihood that this could happen again.
OK, we'll have to leave it there, but Caroline Hacker, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Right, it's just gone 10 minutes past 6. You're watching Anglia.